Welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report for NewsX World. Let's take a look at some news updates from around the world. Okay, the Kremlin says Russian forces will destroy any foreigners fighting for Kyiv as Moscow dismisses US sanctions on its oil sector and says global partners will make their own decisions on buying Russian energy. Speaking to business leaders in Tokyo, President Donald Trump says US-Japan ties are strong, thriving and prosperous, adding they will soon be greater than ever before. He praises his meeting with Prime Minister Kyiv, calling her a delight. President Trump says his upcoming summit with China's Xi Jinping in South Korea will be, quote, great for everybody, as trade hopes rise after talks in Malaysia. He spoke at an event in Tokyo attended by top business leaders, including Apple CEO Tim Cook. Malaysia formally transfers the ASEAN chair to the Philippines as the summit ends, while Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese reaffirms Canberra's deepening engagement with Southeast Asia. Sudan's military chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan confirms the army has left its last stronghold in El Fasher after the RSF claimed control of the city. He says the retreat was approved to stop systematic destruction and killing of civilians amid the escalating conflict. Israeli security forces killed 3 Palestinians in the West Bank during a clash near the Jenin refugee camp, officials have said. Hamas claims 2 of the dead as its members, as Israel says the men were planning attacks before troops and airstrikes moved in. An Israeli hostage advocacy group demands decisive action against Hamas, accusing it of violating the ceasefire after returning only partial remains of a captive whose body was mostly recovered 2 years ago. The group says the government cannot ignore what it calls a severe breach of the agreement. UK government ministers name 2 military sites they want repurposed and aim to shut asylum hotels, part of a push to tighter control over migrant accommodation and national security. We start this hour in the Middle East, where an Israeli group campaigning for the release of hostages held in Gaza urged authorities to act decisively against Hamas, accusing the group of violating the truce by returning only partial remains of a previously recovered captive. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum has accused Hamas of violating the terms of the truce and has called on the Israeli government to not ignore this violation of the deal signed in Egypt last month, apologies. Israel has said that a set of partial hostage remains returned by Hamas the previous day under a ceasefire belonged to a deceased captive recovered by the military around 2 years ago. Okay, for our next story, we now move over to Europe, where Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has issued a statement saying that Russian forces have constantly heard foreign languages being spoken by those fighting for Ukraine on the front lines, concluding that foreigners are present there. He further said that Russia would eliminate all such fighters. Russia has long claimed that NATO military personnel are present in Ukraine and that its intelligence services have repeatedly intercepted English and French being spoken on the front lines. The US-led NATO alliance maintains that it supports Ukraine but has not deployed soldiers there. The Kremlin also acknowledged US President Donald Trump's statements urging other countries to stop purchasing Russian oil, but emphasized that Russia's partners will make their own decisions regarding energy purchases. Peskov added that any country is naturally interested in acquiring strategic commodities, such as energy resources that offer the highest quality at competitive prices. Okay, we're now joined by Andrew Latham. He's a professor of international relations and he joins us live from Minneapolis in the United States. Andrew, it's always a pleasure in getting your insight on these matters. First of all, let's move on to Dmitry Peskov's statement, where he has said that there has been foreign languages being spoken on the front lines of Ukraine. Now, of course, there has been volunteers that have been known to be fighting on that eastern front. Is there any credible sources that there is anything more than just specific individuals that have gone over there on their own accord?
Not to my knowledge. Most of this in the public domain deals with volunteers, people from North America and Europe and indeed around the world who have decided that the Ukrainian cause is a just cause and they're going to fight in defense of Ukraine's sovereignty and independence, etc. Personally, I have little doubt that there are European and perhaps American special forces, not on the front lines, but doing training and other kinds of supportive activities there. I think the Russians are signaling two things, one of which is if you are a volunteer and we capture you, you're going to be treated very harshly. In other words, they're trying to deter people from volunteering to fight on behalf of Ukraine. But they're also signaling an escalation move. If Europe and the United States, North America, decides to deploy forces in uniform in Ukraine, that will be considered an escalation, and Russia will respond appropriately in their own eyes. So again, signaling deterrence, deterrence of volunteers and deterrence of more overt Western military involvement.
Yes, indeed, Andrew. And then, of course, moving on to his statements that he says that Donald Trump, of course, imposed sanctions on Moscow's two largest crude oil companies. A huge move by Washington, one of the largest against Russia since the Trump administration began. The second Trump administration began. Does this show that these sanctions are truly having effect on Russia's war machine?
Well, they haven't to date, and to the extent that this is a scaling up or an escalation, if you like, I think we always have to read the fine print. First of all, this applies to two Russian oil firms, which account for about 50% of Russia's oil exports. So there's that. And second, when you read the fine print, the sanctions right now only apply to American firms. And of course, the concern is not so much with American firms, but with Indian firms and Chinese firms, European firms, et cetera, and end markets as well. This again seems to be signaling that we in the West are ratcheting up pressure. I'm not sure it's going to have the kind of decisive impact on the war that some people are making out. An important signal, yes. An important ratcheting up, yes. Obviously, Russians are pushing back, so it must be hurting somewhat. But decisive, strategically, no.
Yes, and of course the language that Peskov used was a sort of self-autonomous language. He was kind of speaking against the actions of Donald Trump, something which India and of course China were reluctant to adhere to at first, but now are moving towards. Does Moscow fear that they are now signaling a move towards Washington and their economic power, when it does come to energy, will be weakening?
Well, I think that's right. We need to consider the audience for Peskov's comments. It wasn't a domestic audience. It was an American and especially Indian and Chinese and other importers of Russian oil. It was signaled to them. They were the audience. And the idea is that Russia, of course, needs to maintain those markets. The ratcheting up of sanctions is having some incremental effects, along with American diplomacy pushing India, if not China, to over time to reduce its imports of Russian oil. And Peskov is making a statement that, from a Russian perspective, it's about strategic autonomy, not just for Russia, but for India and China and others as well. So this is a grand strategic play about alignments and about supply chains and it's not so much about the battlefield and it's not so much about the short term. It's about bigger picture issues and a bigger picture signal to a much larger audience than just Washington.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Always a pleasure to get your insights here on NewsX World. We now move on over to the Indo-Pacific for our next story, where the United States and Japan have just unveiled a massive $550 billion investment package, marking one of the largest bilateral economic commitments ever. Speaking at a signing ceremony in Tokyo, US Commerce Ministry Howard Lutnick announces that several major Japanese companies are stepping up with huge investments. SoftBank is committing $25 billion, while Bechtel and GE Vernova plan to invest up to $100 billion each in energy projects. Westinghouse is also pledging up to $100 billion towards nuclear reactor development. Lutnick confirms that Toshiba and Carrier are among the firms joining this investment wave. Japan's industry minister says the country's automakers will continue robust US investments as part of this long-term partnership. The projects will focus on energy, nuclear and semiconductor development, reinforcing the US-Japan alliance, a cornerstone of global economic and technological cooperation. Okay, we're now joined by Hidekazu Sakai, an associate professor of Kansai Gidai University, joining us from Tokyo in Japan. Thank you very much for joining us. The significance of this, please, Professor Sakai. $550 billion. What are the implications of this for both economies?
Well, what I understand is that United States needs huge help from Japan, especially in the area shipbuilding. That is critical to today's United States strategic concern. At this point, United States shipbuildings in the market share is less than 1% in the world. That is quite small. And Japan is number 3, the biggest shipbuilder in the world. Then first is, of course, China. Second is Korea. And shipbuilding is directly connected to the United States defense capability. Therefore, United States desperately needs Japan's investment power. And you touched on semiconductor. That is another concern. Chinese semiconductor industry has been developing so quickly in terms of its the skills and technology, and perhaps also amount as well. Therefore, I think United States has been really worried about what we call it the hegemony in semiconductor production. And actually, semiconductor supply chain is very complex, not only in the United States, but also in Korea, Japan, even involving Europe. Therefore, we are witnessing the huge changing semiconductor supply chain in the world scale, and that Japan's role is critical. And other area would be mineral. The rare earths is we all know as the critical natural resource for today's industry, and China is the biggest producer. So Japan and the United States, they both needs to somehow secure their the rare earths, the supply. Therefore, it's gonna be more international cooperation. So this is very, very important.
Yes, indeed. And how would you describe the US-Japanese relationship when it comes to other sectors. Of course, we've seen glowing statements when it's come both from Donald Trump and it's come from the new Japanese Prime Minister when it comes to their development and their promise to work together, especially when it comes to security in the Indo-Pacific. What are your thoughts on that relationship and how it's going to move forward, especially in security, of course?
Okay. Free and open in the Pacific is a very important slogan for late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Since Sanai Takaichi, who is at this point new Prime Minister, has been, was, I should say, a protege of late Prime Minister Abe. Therefore, she has been declaring that she will continue this free and open Indo-Pacific vision, working together with United States and also involving Europe and even India and Southeast Asia. Therefore, this FOIP, we call that free and open Indo-Pacific, is a very important component. And when it comes to security, Takaichi has promised already that Japan will achieve to the expand defense budget to Japan's GDP 2%, and even maybe she's aiming at much bigger the defense budget later on. Of course, she needs to work with other cabinet members and national diet as well. Therefore, but I'm sure that the Takaichi is quite sure that Japan needs to work hard on defense enhancement, working together with the United States. And today is actually an important day that Takaichi went to a U.S. aircraft carrier, George Washington, in Yokosuka port. And the Takaichi and Trump made a speech together in front of those soldiers, and naval soldiers and officers as well. And so Trump introduced Takaichi to those U.S. soldiers that she's a great woman. She's the first female prime minister of Japan. And she also responded to that Trump's address that I work together with you. We appreciate it, you to the U.S. soldiers at the ceremony. Therefore, I think Takaichi has been making clear that Japan will much work together with the United States for security area.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Sakai. Do stay with us as we have further updates from the region. We move on now, and China's foreign ministry says the development of US-Japan relations and their security cooperation must contribute to regional peace and stability. Spokesperson Guo Jiankun has made the remark following a meeting between US President Donald Trump and Japan's new Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi. Guo also called on Tokyo to respect the security concerns of its neighboring countries, referencing Japan's wartime history. He said, quote, "We urge Japan to genuinely respect the security concerns of its neighboring countries, reflect deeply on its history of aggression, and steadfastly pursue the path of peaceful development." This is what he said.
亚太地区是和平发展的高地，美日发展双边关系，开展安全合作，应当有助于维护地区和平稳定，而不是相反。由于近代日本军国主义的侵略历史，日本的军事安全动向一直备受亚洲邻国和国际社会的高度关注。今年是中国人民抗日战争暨世界反法西斯战争胜利80周年。 我们敦促日方切实尊重周边邻国的安全关切，深刻反省侵略历史，坚持走和平发展道路，以实际行动取信于亚洲邻国和国际社会。
Now we move over to the southeast of the continent now, when Malaysia has handed over the chair of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to the Philippines as it marked the end of the annual three-day summit that saw leaders of the regional bloc gather in Kuala Lumpur. Speaking to fellow ASEAN leaders, President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., highlighted the association's 20-year vision and welcomed Timor-Leste, which is the group's newest 11th member. The three-day summit, which began on Sunday, brought together leaders from the ASEAN region and dialogue partners, including the United States, China, Japan, and South Korea. Let's take a listen in to what both the leaders had to say.
Pada hari ini, kita akan labuh tabir untuk tahun ini, dan tahun depan, rakan saya, Presiden Ferdinand Marcos Jr. akan kembali. Your Highness, leaders of ASEAN, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, oh, what a relief.
As your chairship concludes, the Philippines is honored to take on the responsibility of leading ASEAN from 2026. We are committed to carrying forward your momentum and to implement on its first year the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 with purpose and resolve. We likewise remain dedicated to facilitating the further integration of Timor-Leste into the ASEAN.
Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese noted Australia's commitment to Southeast Asia's growth and security as he attended the ASEAN-Australia Summit in Kuala Lumpur. Let's take a listen in to what the Australian Prime Minister has stated.
And I'm pleased that today we've agreed the ASEAN-Australian Leaders' Statement on Conflict Prevention and Crisis Management. This important statement demonstrates our shared commitment to upholding a peaceful and stable Southeast Asia, guarding against conflict and other potential threats to the rules and norms that advance all of our interests. In a time of global economic uncertainty, Australia certainly does remain invested and committed to Southeast Asia's growth and prosperity.
We're once again joined by Haidkazu Sakai. Haidkazu, ASEAN has a new leader, the Philippines. What responsibilities will the Philippines now have to fulfill as leader of that bloc?
Well, Philippines has been having a very difficult relationship with China many decades because of the territorial water issues in South China Sea. And therefore, Philippines' implication to take a leadership in this area is actually requires Japan to get involved, because Southeast Asia has been always working hard on this very difficult territorial water issues, but there's no solutions yet. And the key word is rule of law. And I think China is aware of this rule of law, but China doesn't want to practice rule of law because China wants to push as much as possible to expand its influence in this area. Therefore, ASEAN's message to ASEAN's message to the China is actually implicitly we need the more balanced the discussions on this, because China always using stick of economic benefit with ASEAN. Therefore, territorial waters issues on the other hand, and on the other hand is the economic benefits. And ASEAN is always tempting, to the neither way. And so now Takaichi made a trip to ASEAN meeting this time. That was the first diplomatic trip to Takaichi. And Takaichi was working with the ASEAN so that ASEAN can all kind of support Japan. Japan can support ASEAN. Therefore, this Japan and ASEAN, the cooperation is perhaps very important to China.
Okay, Haidkazu Sakai, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's been a pleasure to have you on. We now move on over to the African continent, and Tanzania's semi-autonomous Alleges of Zanzibar witnessed the commencing of early polling today as general elections get underway in the East African nation. The early polling exercise comes after months of claims by the opposition of a campaign to rig the elections in the ruling dissensions favour, with the opposition candidate's latest claim being that the Election Commission is complicit in the rigging, allowing ineligible voters to cast their vote in early polls. The opposition also has claimed that there are significant numbers of deceased persons in the voter lists published by the Election Commission. They have also claimed that the early voting exercise is an excuse for the government to rig the elections in their favour. The main opposition candidates have been barred from running in this election, with mainland Tanzania set to go to the polls on October the 29th. Well, that's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.